The message was the air conditioning is not working. So Rob was gracious enough to pick me up right at midnight and got back here, probably got in bed a little after 1. So I was thinking I might be dragging more than I am. We're ready? All right. Let me get this untangled here. All right, welcome everybody. We are here for our 5th year. We try to refresh the material every year, so we hope for those of you who have been to some of the previous classes, you'll enjoy this one as well. We're going to do this in 3 parts. The first one is, I call it the D-Star Basics. The second one is using D-Star, and we get into more of the programming. You might want to get one of the other ones because I'm going to probably be in your way there. Second hour is using D-Star, and we go through a lot of the programming for all the different radios and how to make the most of that. And the third one, we're going to do some fun and talk about some of the different devices that are available. And that's changed since last year. There's a lot more out there. So we'll talk some about that. So let's get started with our first hour here. And again, this will be, the recorded version of this will be available in a few days, a week or so, on dstarinfo.com and also on the Icom YouTube channel. All right, I hate to have to cover this every year, but you have to remind people of this because I still hear this myth. D-Star is not a proprietary protocol. It is an open standard for digital voice and data, but it was one of the now only 2 that was designed specifically for amateur radio, and it was the first. It is one of several modes, and we'll talk just very briefly about just a quick comparison of some of the other digital modes. D-Star was developed by the Japan Amateur Radio League, which is kind of like the FCC and ARRL rolled into one. It uses the AMB family of vocoder chips. Some people will always say, why don't you roll your own vocoder for this? Who's got time to do it? Who can support it? And how much processing time is it going to take? And the AMB vocoder is, I've heard, about a $20 addition to a radio. Why not do that from a commercial source? All of the digital modes use the chipset, the vocoder chipset from DVSI. D-Star has been one of the pioneers in encouraging experimentation and open development. Being an open protocol, I think one of the things that has made D-Star grow so quickly is that you had some other people other than the manufacturer who began developing add-ons and devices and other things for it, which really expanded what it is. For those of you who are new to digital modes, there's a little bit of a change. I won't really call it getting used to, but a couple of things to understand on it. We're all used to analog FM, sideband, all your standard analog modes, and as your signal degrades, what happens? The quality changes, a lot more noise is in there. Digital is different in that it will stay the same whether you've got a strong signal, a moderate signal, or a relatively weak signal. What happens when you get out near the edge of usable signal strength is that it finally drops off from that good quality. Now, at the point it's dropping off, if you compared to it the analog portion of that, you'd be down in the weeds. You'd be down in the noise. And one of the things that really helps all digital signals is forward error correction. And that's some extra bits that's added to the data stream to help reconstruct the signal if you start losing some bits here and there. So that extends that out. We're probably from this area right here out to here because of the forward error correction. So that's one of the main differences, and this applies to all the digital modes. Another thing to consider is that it is purely data. It's ones and zeros that's being transmitted over the air. So your voice is being converted to ones and zeros. We can add data along the way with it, which is one of the unique things about D-Star. And then you're modulating your radio as a data carrier. If you're new or you're still an analog user and you tune in on a digital repeater, D-Star or whatever, what you hear is a kind of a hiss buzz sound. So some people will say, I don't know what that is. There's some interference on this frequency. One of my other hats that I wear, I'm a frequency coordinator for the Southeast Repeater Association in Georgia. And as we started coordinating digital repeaters, D-Star being the first ones out there, you'd have a lot of people saying, what's this noise I'm hearing on this frequency? They'd think they're getting interfered with during a band opening when all they're hearing is a distant D-Star or other type of digital repeater. Now, one of the big advantages of digital, and especially D-Star, is that you don't use as much spectrum. As shown in the picture here, an FM analog signal, if you look at the FCC emission designator, it says it's 16 kilohertz wide. If you look at the different digital modes, they're going to be generally much narrower. What triggered this, in some cases, was the FCC requirement for commercial land mobile radio to narrow down. And one of the ways they could do that is digital modulation. D-Star is one of the most spectrally efficient modes out there. And even the emission designator on it is 6.25 kilohertz. So it's a much narrower signal. Now, does that mean you can sandwich more side by side? Well, you still have to worry about real close in, but if you look at an area in general, let's take a state, you could put more digital, especially D-Star repeaters, in the same space over what you could do with analog repeaters. Now, frequency coordinators are catching up around the country. Some are more proactive about it than others. I'm pleased that the Southeastern Repeater Association, which is 8 southeastern states, took a very proactive role, and we allow for the different bandwidths of the different digital modes, for example, D-Star, DMR, Fusion, and P25, to really look at how they can all fit together and make the best use of that. In fact, some frequencies have been set aside for the narrowest band of digital repeaters such as D-Star. Now here's a quick comparison, and I don't want to go into a lot of detail, and I'm not bad-mouthing any digital mode because I do all of them. Commercially, I'm even doing P25 now for my work. I didn't put it up here, but these are the 3 major ones that are out there. D-Star being the first, it's been out there the longest. As of, I just looked at the stats this week, it's over 46,000 registered users. Now, that's the registered users. Those that are on the IRC DDB sites don't have to register, and so that number is actually, I'm sure, considerably higher than that, probably especially in Europe where it's even more popular. Compared to, I was looking at the best stats I could get. DMR, also known as Moto Turbo in some flavors, has about 30,000 users. So it has grown. It is number 2, but it has grown considerably. System Fusion is really hard to characterize the number of users and repeaters. Now, I did get some information from them. They have shipped over 1,500 repeaters. Now, if you remember, they offered the $500, now I think it's $600 repeaters. I think my experience is the majority of those that went in service to replace FM repeaters. And the majority of them have never had a digital signal go through them. Great marketing technique, but not doing much for digital. If you look at the occupied bandwidth, D-Star is going to be the narrowest, DMR and Fusion. I can't find, I've been looking for close to 3 years now, the FCC emission designator for Fusion, and I can't find it. I think based on the type of modulation it is, the vocoder, et cetera, it's going to be similar to DMR, somewhere between DMR and P25, and P25 is a little wider. One of the main differences between D-Star being a totally open protocol compared to many of the DMR repeaters that are operating the Motorola proprietary networking. There are others, Hytera Networks and Brandmeister and some others that are emerging out there that get away from that proprietary side. Fusion, we're not really sure yet what the differences are going to be in its networking. One of the things that really sets D-Star apart is where you want to go, where you want to link is totally in your hand, as opposed to something like DMR, which is coming out of the commercial world, and understandably, its users, they don't have the need or necessarily the ability, if you're like police, fire, public safety people, to say, oh, well, I want to link to here or I want to do this. That stuff is defined by the system administrator. So the talk groups that you have accessible to you may be more limited than you would like on D-Star, which you can link anywhere. If you want to link to a repeater in Australia, across town, link to a reflector like 1 Charlie or 30 Charlie that's got 100 users on at any time, you can do that under your control. D-Star, while the others have some data capabilities, D-Star has made that easily available and some applications available for it. Most of the radios, you've got free software, programming software available. There is some good commercial software available, like from RT Systems, but a lot of them have the free Icom or Chirp or any of those that can be used for that. Here's the point that gets kind of interesting. With D-Star, there are multiple devices that are available. Primarily, Icom has been the radio producer for this. I think that's about to change, I'm hearing a rumor. So you might want to drop by a booth in the main arena, not mentioning any names starting with K, but you might want to see another manufacturer. It looks like they're going to enter the D-Star arena with a commercially available radio as well. All right, how does D-Star work? Very simply. You divide the 4800 BPS signal over the air into 2400 bits for voice, another 1200 for that forward error correction. So that's 3600 allocated to voice. That leaves you 1200 for data, kind of 1200 BPS, similar to packet speed data. It is true narrowband signal. It's not narrowband equivalent, like some will say that have a wider signal but carries two time slots and two carries on it. It is truly a 6.25 kilohertz narrowband signal. One of the issues that I always hear say, well, you have to have the internet to make D-Star work. No, you do not. In its very simplest form, you can go simplex between two radios and have a lot of the same features, the clear voice, the data capability. Expand that by going through a repeater. Repeaters can die. You can revert back to simplex, but the repeater is just going to extend the range that you can do that. Add the internet through a gateway of some sort, and that opens up the linking to create a large footprint or linking to a repeater in another city. D-Star has radios that are available for the 2 meter, 440, and the 1.2 gigahertz band. And in the 1.2 gigahertz band, we'll talk about this a little bit later, You can do a faster bandwidth and IP-based type data transfer. Even though the ID1, the primary radio for that, has been discontinued, there's still a lot of them around out there. And if you can get your hands on one cheap, it might be worthwhile to think of. DPRS is what I'll call the digital equivalent of APRS. Many of the radios, as we'll talk about, have built-in GPS, so you can send your signal, your position, with your signal, and that can show up a lot of different places. Reflectors add a whole new dimension. What's a reflector? It's a giant conference bridge. And then there's other devices that are out there. We'll talk about a few in the third hour, go into a lot more detail of how you can get on the internet in a variety, or on the D-Star network in a variety of ways. Yes?
Reflectors are just from a physical standpoint, is it basically just a computer program or is it actual hardware?
Yes. Question is, what is a reflector physically? It's generally a, I'll call a server class machine, and you want it to be connected to a high bandwidth type connection, because the advantage of a reflector is one in, many out. So it has to reflect or send that data stream out to all of the repeaters, which makes it very efficient from your local repeater, because you only have one going out, and then that can go 100, 150 places that you'd like. D-Star continues to grow. I update this chart every year, and the curve keeps going up. Maybe not quite as fast as it did in the earlier years, but it was even easier to double your user base when you just had 1,000 users, 2,000 users, etc. But as you can see through 2015, there was still significant growth of both repeaters, gateways, and users. Now, the repeaters and gateways does not totally reflect the number that's out there. What you're seeing on this are the repeaters and gateways that are on the US Trust server. There is an equal or maybe even larger, I'm told, number of repeaters and gateways using the IRC DDB network. So D-Star is definitely growing, continuing to expand, lots of opportunity to do things. Equipment-wise, one of the things I think that made D-Star very successful from the start was that you have a full line of products: mobiles, portables, repeaters. As I'm saying, commercially produced by Icom, but I think today that's about to change in terms of a commercially manufactured radio. Lots of other devices. We'll talk in more detail about DV dongle type devices. So if you want an Echolink type experience, you don't have a radio, this allows you to get on the D-Star network through your computer using a headset or a microphone, external microphone. DV access point, boy, when that came out, I was in heaven, because I was traveling a lot at the time, and I'd turn up my DVAP in the hotel room, and I was untethered again on my handheld, so that made it nice. Raspberry Pis, we'll talk about how they've been integrated into this, and node adapters. One of the pioneers of the node adapters, Jim Moen, is going to be one of the speakers this afternoon in the D-Star Forum at around 12:30. Was there another question earlier when we had the reflector question? Did someone else have a question that I missed? Okay. Yes?
What's the difference between the trust servers and the
IRC DDB? Question is, what's the difference between the trust server and IRC DDB? I'm going to give you a quick explanation of this, but I'll go into more detail in either later in this segment or in the second hour. The original system, as it was set up for gateways using the Icom, if you had an Icom repeater, was there had to be somebody out there that served as kind of the synchronization source for the database of users. So the U.S. trust server that's operated not by Icom, but a group of hams in the Dallas area called the Texas Interconnect team, owe them a great debt of gratitude for their work in pioneering that, setting that up. I actually saw the U.S. root trust server back in February. I was in the building in Dallas where that's housed, and I got to touch it, actually. I felt like I was at the Holy Grail. But my hat's off to the guys there who've been maintaining that. What that provides is a way to synchronize the users. It talks to all of the repeaters. Let's say someone registers on a repeater in Arkansas. That goes up to the trust server, and then that synchronizes that database out to all of the ones connected to that. IRC-DDB takes a different approach. And I can't explain how the synchronization works on it, but one of the advantages was it didn't synchronize, but if a user changed from one repeater to another, which is another thing that US root takes care, trust server tracks. So if I go key up in Dallas, go get on a plane to Atlanta, and key up again, there was about a 5-minute delay of saying, oh, you're in Atlanta now, if I did call sign routing. IRC-DDB is a protocol that doesn't have that centralized server, but it's more of a distributed architecture. So it's just a different way of doing it. Most of the repeaters can do dual. They can talk to US Trust. They can also do IRC-DDB. Some will be one or the other. I'll go into a little bit more detail on that a little bit later. Good question. As I was saying, up to this point, if you wanted a commercial radio, you bought an Icom radio. It appears that that's changing finally, that another manufacturer is coming on board with that. Understand it's going to be a pretty nice radio. One of the advantages of all of the radios that were built by Icom is they have a built-in serial port. Now it's RS-232, but it can be as simple as 3 pins: transmit data, receive data, and ground. But that allowed easy interfacing for doing either just simple keyboard to keyboard up through some more functional things like DRATs and other things. Another feature of at least, well, any of the D-Star radios, you could connect a GPS receiver through that serial port. The later models of D-Star radios had built-in GPS. So you started seeing that in the 92 AD had the GPS speaker mic, and then the 3151, 5100, 2820 had an external GPS antenna. We still have one of those in our Aries trailer, and I really like having that external GPS antenna because in a metal box, it's not going to receive off the antenna built in the front panel. So I could snake that little antenna up to the vent where it can get a view of the sky. So that worked out well for that radio. In the newer radios, they're built into either the head on the mobile or into the radio itself. And there's a lot of functionality that you get by having GPS built in with that. On the mobile line, you see kind of the full line here, starting with the 2200 and the ID800. That updated to the 880, the 2820, and now we're on the ID5100, and it's come down quite a bit in price. I remember what I paid for my two 2820s that I had, up in the $800 and something range, and now what you can buy a 5100 for is very competitive to pretty much a lot of the mobiles that are out there. I do like the features of both the 2820 and the 5100 having dual band and dual receive. That's a nice feature if you want to listen to 2 signals at once. The 2820, you could only listen to one of those being D-Star because there's only one vocoder in it. Now, They cheat a little bit on the 5100. You can actually receive 2 D-Star signals, but not at the same time. You can tune it in on each side, tune a repeater in on each side of the radio, and it'll go between them, whichever one's active. So they cheat a little bit, but you can actually receive 2 D-Star signals on the 5100. Great radio. Wish the display was a little higher contrast, but overall a good radio, very good radio. And they put crossband repeat as a menu function. You don't have to stand on one foot and press these buttons in sequence like it's a hidden feature on some of the other radios. Handhelds. All the way from the early ones, the 80, the 91, 92, all the way up to the ID51A now. The thing that in the latest generation, the 3151 and 5100, we're going to talk about in the second hour is DR mode. I'm going to ask you real quick, for those of you that have a 3151 or a 5100, how many of you use DR mode? How many are not using it? You will when you leave here today. You'll love it. Am I right? For those of you using it, it simplified D-Star programming so much. All right. 1.2 data. The ID1 was always kind of a mystery to a lot of people, as is 1.2 gigahertz. Anyone that operates that high a frequency knows it almost becomes a line of sight type mode. You're bordering on getting up into microwave signals. But 1.2 gigahertz is a very good ham band. The ID1, which was actually, I think it may have been one of the first D-Star radios produced. And in Japan, they thought that D-Star would flourish on 1.2 gigahertz. So much for their thinking there. The ID1 has become a popular radio for a lot of the emergency Icom, emergency communications organizations. I usually bring mine, but flying up, I didn't bring it this time. I put my ID1 in a Pelican case with a couple of batteries, a little router, and it actually has an Ethernet RJ45 pigtail coming out of it. So even though it will operate on FM and it will operate regular digital voice D-Star on 1.2, the high-speed data function is what really makes this radio very useful for last mile type communications. If you need to get something faster than 1200 BPS out to a site, you can make either a point-to-point Ethernet bridge at about 128 kilobits. Now, we're spoiled with cell phones that now I think I've gotten as high as about 20 or 30 megabits from Verizon if I'm sitting right under a tower. So we're spoiled with that, but let's say you're out in the middle of nowhere and this is what you've got, and 128 kilobits isn't too bad. We've actually used it on some of our Aries exercises, and as long as you're not painting big screens with a lot of graphics, if it's a lot of text-based or simple graphics, it'll work great. We actually did a public health exercise, and we were working with our emergency management organization in our county, and they use WebEOC. Any of you that might have come into that, we were able to, it's a web-based messaging and type thing that a lot of the EMA organizations use. It was fine until it was painting a screen about yay long on there, and then it slowed down. But it worked very well for us where we did not have internet connectivity. ID1s have been discontinued. You can find them out there for $400 or $500 right now. They originally sold for close to $1,000. If you see one in good shape out there, grab it up. A friend of mine just bought one out on a flea market table in Georgia at a ham fest for $300. He was chancing that it still worked. It didn't have all the cables and everything that went with it, but it was in good shape and he's been using it. That's his second ID1, so he can set up a complete link. Here's your typical architecture for a D-Star repeater. and I'm using the Icom equipment as an example. You have a controller, the module at the top, the RP2C, and then you have an RF module for each one of the bands. You'll have a 2-meter module, a 440 module, 1.2 voice, and 1.2 data. We were fortunate to get a grant for about $250,000 in Georgia through Georgia Emergency Management Agency, which equipped about 9 repeaters. And the way we did it is we took a 2-meter module, a 440 module, and a 1.2 data. Because we've actually done some flying an ID-1 in an aircraft and sending pictures back from the air, which replaced what they were doing with sat phones. They almost had to land to send that picture at a blazing 9,600 BPS. So that configuration works well. Although some people did a full stack, as it's called, with the 1.2 voice module, they rarely get used. Now, they connect through a Linux computer. I have seen as small as a Raspberry Pi being used for a gateway. Probably not running the Icom gateway software, but probably running as IRC-DDB. I think it will fit and run pretty well on that. And that, of course, connects to the internet. That's your interface to the internet. Registration. First off, registration is optional. If you are running on an IRC-DDB repeater, you really don't have to register. But many times you don't know if that repeater is both a US Trust Server repeater or dual Trust Server IRC-DDB. And to be able to get into the D+ reflectors, that are the REF 001 through, what is it, 70-something now, 77 I believe it is, you will need to register. Now, here are the rules on registering. When you do that, it allows you to execute the linking functions on a D+ equipped repeater, which many of the repeaters in the US are connected to the US Trust Server and run D+. Ideally, you will want to register on the repeater that's closest to you. That's not a requirement. And unfortunately, like anything else, there are people who put up repeaters and they kind of forgot about the administration responsibilities that go with them. One of the deficiencies in the regular Icom gateway software, you register, and unless the system administrator goes out and checks and sees is there anyone new that registered, very often you won't know. There are some little add-on modules that have been developed that will let a person know by text or email if a new person registers. So if you need some information on that, shoot me an email and I'll give you some information on that. It uses, I'm trying to remember the name of the software package, but one of the US Trust administrators has developed a little script file that works with that. So I get an email when someone registers on my repeater. Now, here's the trick. Register on one and only one system. Here's the problem with that. I go register on ABC repeater in Bumfuzzle, North Dakota. If you're from North Dakota, I'm sorry. That's not a cut. Is it really? You're from there? Yeah. I bet. That system administrator doesn't respond. And you're anxious to get on, you're going on a trip, you want to use it. So you go out and register on another repeater. Here's the problem. If you are approved on 2 repeaters, that can cause some big confusion in the databases. So occasionally I'll have someone send me an email and say, I've been waiting for a month now and this guy hasn't approved me. What can I do? My advice is try to get a hold of the guy or lady, might be, and get them to delete your registration. If you have trouble registering, I'm going to offer you can go to one of two repeaters, and I'll give you one of them that I would recommend, WD4STR, Whiskey Delta 4, Sierra Tango Romeo. That's my repeater in Georgia. I back up that database. It's backed up in two different places. I'm notified when someone registers, and so within just a few hours, minutes to hours, I try to approve a registration. If there's one close to you, try that. But if you have trouble, send me an email, wb4qdx@arrl.net. I've done this every year, and people don't, I don't get too many that have a problem with it, but I'll be glad to try to help you out. If you go there, remember that registration is a three-step process. Let me get on the cable there. Let me pull that under your feet. There we go. Registration is a three-step process, and you must complete all three steps. The first step is you'll go to the registration page, and here we are on WD4STR. You put in your call sign in uppercase. Hams don't follow directions, but try to read them. Put your call sign in. Well, first thing you're going to do is you're going to be a new user. So you're going to register. And then you're going to get the opportunity on this screen. First, you got to read my disclaimer that says you will behave, you will act like a nice ham, or I will ban you for life. You have to agree to that. Call sign, name, password that you make up and confirm that password. And then you are registered. Now, at this point, I am notified, or the system administrator is notified, and they will go in and approve you. Now, if you are, how many in here might be system administrators for your local repeater? I advise you to be very diligent as a system administrator and go out and check and see if that person has registered anywhere else. Try to validate that they are who they are. Go look them up in QRZ or whatever. If you need a site to go to, I can give you a couple of them that will go out and show the status, whether they're registered or not. If they're registered, do they have terminals applied? If you need any of that, see me. But we'll go check and we will approve you. And then I usually send out an email back to that person and say, here is the third step that you need to do to complete this. Your registration is not complete until you do this. You log back in on that page here. You're logging in as a user. And then you get to this page. It's very simple to do, and I always include this document in my email that tells you how to do this, starting at step 8. What you want to do is you want to put an X in that, or just click on that to get that box. There's another box here that says initial. Hit the space bar. That sounds strange. Hit the space bar. Don't put a letter in there. You don't need to do that. And then come out here to the right under PC name, and you just make up something. This is roughly for DNS purposes, but I usually just put in like my call sign dash name. Like I'd put in, you see in this one, I just put in my call sign. You do not need more than one terminal for 99.99999% of the people. Some people, and I used to get all over HRO in Atlanta for this, they would go in and register about 3 different, they'd do an A, B, and a C in there, thinking they had to do that for their DVAP, or one for their dongle, one for their mobile, one for their handheld. You do not, let me repeat, you do not need more than a space and one terminal in there. It eliminates a whole lot of confusion in troubleshooting. If you go get a DV dongle, a DV Mega, whatever, people will say, well, do I put the A in this one, or do I just put the call sign, and then what did I use for a terminal? And I see all kinds of emails from people who said, I can't get this to work. Did you register just a space for your call sign only? I don't know. So please just put a space in there, and then that way when you enter your call sign into your radio or your DV access point or any of your other devices, just put your call sign in there, no suffix. That will eliminate a lot of headaches. All right, that's the process. And then all you have to do is go back and add your call sign in the My Call field or My field in your radio. You do want to do that regardless. Otherwise, you're branded an anonymous Kerchunker. And you can't do that on D-Star because we want to know who you are. Also, if the system does not see your call sign and see that it's a registered call sign or an approved call sign, you may not be able to execute some of the functions on D-Star, like linking on a D+ repeater, etc. The call sign field is one of the things you'll fill out on one of the devices, like a DV dongle or a DV access point, DV mega, any of those devices. So all you have to do, you don't have to have an A, B, or C on it. Just that space means you're using your call sign only. All right, any questions on the registration? Remember, registration is optional, but it is needed if you plan to do any linking functionality. Yes, sir?
So I know when I bought the radio, HR registered it for me. How do I know how they registered it?
Well, you should be, did they tell you back here what your call sign and password is? And what repeater they registered you on? Was it HRO Atlanta? Good folks, good guys. In fact, they probably sold more D-Star radios than the rest of the world combined. So you probably talked to Mark or Josh. And so what you would go to is wb4hro.dstargateway.org, and then you got to put this little suffix up there, capital D / capital D star.do. So it's, and you have to do it HTTPS. So it's HTTPS : / and then the call sign of the repeater that you registered on .dstargateway.org / capital D star.do. That's why you have these slides you refer to later on. And that will get you to the registration page for that repeater. So just substitute the call sign, in that case, wb4hro.dstargateway.org. Put in your call sign in uppercase, and then hopefully there's a password. If they call them if you need to and say, give me my password or change it. Now, probably if it was HRO Atlanta, they probably registered an A, B, C, and D for you, which is not needed, but they usually register the space. Just ignore all that other stuff. You really don't need to go back in and change anything unless you wanted to change your password or something. But just always use the space, which means you're putting your call sign only in, no suffix, no space A, B, C, any of that. Yes?
I've got a question for the Icom ID51A Plus. They recommend you get a micro SD card.
Mm-hmm.
Does the radio itself have internal memory, or I do need the micro SD card for
I was thinking, do we go over that in the second hour? But that's a good question. Question is, on the ID 51A would also apply to the 31 and 5100. It has a slot for an SD card. The SD card, you do not have to put it in there because all of your channels that you've programmed in are stored in the internal memory of the radio. Where the SD card comes in, it can be used for 3 functions. The main one is you can save memory configurations to that SD card. Now, when we get into the second hour on programming, you could see on my SD card, if I brought it in, you'd see about 10 or 12 files saved in there as CSV files. And that way, if I go to a different city, I import that from the SD card for whatever the repeaters are in that area. So when I go to a new city, I'll usually take about 5 minutes and build me a CSV file off of dstarinfo.com. And then I can just go to that city, import it. It takes about 30 seconds to import it or less. Now, the other thing that the SD card will give you is you can actually record a QSO to the SD card. You can also store GPS memories on that SD card. But the main functionality that everyone loves in it is saving. You can save your complete configuration, which stores as an ICF file, or you can create CSV files, which load a repeater list in your DR memories. And once you learn how to do that, you are sold. Okay, was there other questions in the back?
The radio support multiple call signs?
Say again?
The radio support multiple.
Yes, I think 5 or 6, and you select those in the menu, and you can select which call sign. So if you have an XYL or a harmonic that uses your radio, you can do that. You can also store multiple messages. Like if you turn the message on, like usually I've got one in there, I'll say I'm Hamvention, Dayton, Ohio, or Orlando Hamcation, one of those. Yes? Well, you remember, yes, if that club is not operating a repeater, you do not want a D-Star repeater. A D-Star repeater and a radio cannot have the same call sign. So, but you can register a club call. Now, how would you use it? Does the club have several radios, or does the club have a club station with a D-Star radio? And in that case, you'd put that club call in it. If you had multiple radios that you might loan out or use for special events or something, yes, you could put the same call sign in all of those radios. That would work also. But most people, if you have a club station with a D-Star radio, we have, in our county, we have a D-Star radio at the EMA office. We have one in our Aries trailer. We also have 3 hospitals in the county. What we did, each one of those has a separate call sign in them. One, so we know when they key up who it is. So for our 3 hospitals, we designated a trustee for the license and have a club call for each one of those. Any more questions? All right, we're through right on time for our first hour. Let's take about let's say a 10-minute break. We're going to dive in. The next hour has got the real meat. We'll be back for that.
I was playing around at home trying to get a hold of you guys.